Members of the Youth International Party, hippies they called themselves, converged on Chicago. They said they were there to protest the war, poverty, racism, and other social ills. Some of them were also determined to provoke a confrontation, to draw attention from the convention to the streets. Mayor Richard Daley vowed to keep it peaceful, even if it took force to keep the peace. He was backed by 12,000 police, 5,000 National Guardsmen, 7,500 regular Army troops. Hundreds of marchers and dozens of policemen were injured. Restraint was absent on both sides. This was later called a police. During that frightful week, the demonstrators repeatedly tried to march on the site of the convention, the stockyards. Repeatedly, they were forced back. But even inside the convention hall, the virus of violence was pervasive. Dan Rapp and Walter Cronkite at CBS News. Take your hands off of me, Anrod. I can't get to arrest me. Don't push me, please.
Okay, it's 11 o'clock. So let me show you another video from Lyndon Johnson became president of the United States, as we covered at the last class, when John F. Kennedy was killed. And people that, that admire John F. Kennedy claim that John F. Kennedy was someone who perceived more complexity in international relations than in terms of the motivations for national self-determination movements in Vietnam and in third world countries, and that he was not he was less prone to stereotype the international political system in terms of the enemy stereotype of the outside world that was demanding change, whereas you can put this, for example, you can note the extent to which people have varying degrees of complexity of perception of how foreign policy is made, for example, in Moscow and Beijing and Hanoi and Pyongyang and Berlin, or you can have a diabolical enemy image of basically the Soviet Union, the world communist movement being controlled from Moscow, the way Eisenhower portrayed the communist expansion into Tibet when in that phone call I showed you in the a conversation that John F. Kennedy was having during the Cuban Missile Crisis when he was looking for advice from former presidents and other sources. And when Kennedy was killed, of course, Lyndon Johnson became president of the United States, and he, in his behavior, he was more like Eisenhower in his worldview and his understanding what was going on in Vietnam, the Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved, but then the conflict in Vietnam was escalating, and Lyndon Johnson saw it, or tended to see it, basically as something instigated by Moscow, and that basically the Soviet Union was a Russian version of Nazi Germany, and that the Soviet Union was this diabolical enemy that was instigating all this trouble, opposing American influence and the influence of America's friends, the allies of Western Europe in their former colonies, like, for example, in so-called French Indochina, right? That area had been part of the French Empire, and the French had dominated and exploited Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia to make lots of money through exploitation of the resources there at terrible, terrible cost and suffering to the people in Vietnam. So it's perhaps not surprising that Vietnamese nationalists would look to Marxism and communism for ideas about how to solve their problems, when so much of their suffering appeared to be justified by French colonialist capitalist exploitation to grow rubber plantations, to grow rubber plants for rubber, to make money for Michelin and other French companies and corporations. So, and of course, as the United States was supporting France after World War II, as part of containment of the Soviet Union, the Vietnamese and others would look for the adversaries of the United States to appeal to them for help and aid and assistance against their local enemies who were allied with the United States and the French and the British, for example. So this characterizes much of what was going on during the Cold War. And the US president, because of his role as a living symbol of the American nation, has a big impact, more so than other individual leaders, on American foreign policy, because he politically has more influence over American public opinion, and because of American nationalist self-identification with the American state and the government that represents the state, which is represented by the president. And that's a major source of political power for a president. And that's why we have to understand the mind and thinking of individual American presidents, because they make a big difference. They're not completely determining American foreign policy, but they are really important. So what goes on in Joe Biden's head, or Donald Trump's head, or Barack Obama's head is very important. At the same time, what is going on inside their head, you have to know, is not only able to be determined by listening to the words coming out of their mouth, because words and propaganda are important pieces of evidence, but you never determine a country's foreign policy motivations and intentions only by the rhetoric, the words coming out of the president's mouth, or the prime minister's mouth of another country. Words are important, rhetoric is important, but look at their behavior. What kind of choices in foreign policy do they make? So when Lyndon Johnson became president, he was president for the last year and 3 months of John F. Kennedy's presidency, because Kennedy was killed in November 1963. And then the next elections for US president were in November 1964. And Lyndon Johnson ran for president in 1964. And his opponent was an even more strong Cold Warrior than he was, or maybe not. But anyway, his rhetoric was very, very Cold Warrior, that the US was in a battle against the forces of evil, and the world is divided into the free world and the forces of evil. He talked in these terms. What he would have done if he became president, I don't know. But he talked in very harsh Cold War terms. this person, Barry Goldwater, who was a Republican senator from Arizona here. So he won in the election, Arizona and the southern states where that had been the core of the Confederate states that attempted to secede from the United States 100 years earlier in the American Civil War to protect slavery, which is a topic for the American history class that I'm teaching now. Why is that the case? So Johnson won in a landslide, but those protesters in 1968 at the Chicago Convention here in Chicago, Illinois, for the next presidential election in after the 1964 election, they felt betrayed by him because he made himself appear like he was the peace candidate against this man, that he was in favor of peace, that he was going to continue working for peace, that he was as peaceful as John F. Kennedy was. And of course, he gets a lot of criticism because he had very effective political campaign against this person who talked about going to war against the Soviet Union and the communists in China. He talked about war and nuclear weapons and rollback. And he, of course, wanted to win the election in 1964. He wanted people to vote for him. And one of the most powerful political advertisements and campaign ads was from his political campaign in 1964 for the presidency, showing the impact of the Cold War and foreign policy on American politics. And I'll show it to you now. I think I have it set up ready to go. Make sure that, because it's a short video, so we can't, let me see, close this. And I thought I opened that, but maybe I didn't. So let me open it again here.
On the line.
Okay, so make sure I share the screen.
Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
And then, of course, this person won the election, and then he made the major commitment in 1965, Lyndon Johnson did, to send American ground forces, military forces in large numbers to Vietnam, because he believed, when you look at his other words and other statements and other explanations, that the Soviet Union was behind this, the upheaval and resistance and revolutionary forces occurring in Vietnam. And that if Vietnam became communist, it would lead to a communist advance throughout the rest of Asia, throughout Southern Asia, eventually taking over South Korea and Japan and Africa, and encouraging communism in Europe. And then eventually the Americans would be faced with the supposed Russian version of Nazi Germany controlling the whole world. And you can find statements where he, and other evidence where he said that, but you look at that campaign ad from 1964, he sounds like he's the man of peace, because he knew he needed to say that to get elected, to win votes. And that really angered many people as the Vietnam War progressed and the Americans continued to fail to win the war, and more Americans were killed and died, and there was no progress. Remember, there was a military draft at the time. People had to go serve in the army. Boys had to go serve in the army if the government contacted them. Not like today, not like in Afghanistan. That's all volunteer, right? And so, and you saw the protesters at that time. So my question to you is, to go to an exercise. stop share and go back to screen share. And I would like to have you respond to this. Well, let me just a second. Okay, so make sure I stop. Okay, so you can see this. So please respond to the following statement. U.S. foreign policy is the will of the people. U.S. is a democracy, right? Maybe the will of the people changes, but U.S. foreign policy represents the will of the people. And so do you strongly agree, neutral cannot decide, disagree, strongly disagree. So let me divide you into breakout rooms. And we have, let's make it 4. And so join your rooms, please. And of course, it's meant to be provocative. There's no right or wrong answer. I just want you to make an argument, come to a position and make an argument. And who's going to speak first for your group? Gilles, please. Okay. So heads, it's the top person in the group, and it's tails. Heads, it's the bottom person in the group. So it's the bottom person. So Chun Hyo Kyung will speak for room 1. T-Men will speak for room 2. Kim Jae Hwan will speak for room 3 first. And for room 4 is Kang Tong-un Sally will speak first for room 4. So tell me where your group fits in on this scale in response to this statement. U.S. foreign policy represents the will of the people. And I will write a statement as well. And so heads, I'm 1 through 3. It's tails. Heads, I'm 4. It's 4, so I disagree. This is a tough one. This is tougher than I thought it was going to be, even for me. 10 seconds. Okay, so who's going to speak first? Heads, it's 1 or 2, and it's heads. Heads, it's group 1, and it's heads. So group 1 will speak, and that means Chon Hyo Kyung. Chon Hyo Kyung, where does your group fit on this scale?
I think it's between agree and neutral, like 2.5. It's
Why?
because I think the example of the illegal immigration shows that people need America First policy, which is American foreign policy, made the power to Trump. So yeah, I thought that it's the foreign policy is the will of the U.S. Citizen, but Dohi and Alisa, yeah, Alisa thought it's neutral because they agree that president decides everything, but not that not everything. They need the support from the American people.
You know, that's really interesting. You know, it sounds like what you're saying, and this is why I had some trouble writing my statement for disagree, was that basically the will of the people is represented insofar as the people agree to obey and submit to and support and degree of support for the authorities represented by the government. Because the authorities include the college professors and the newspaper editors and the journalists, and the rich business people, but the government is the officials responsible for representing the authorities, and the authorities and the people, and the extent to which the people obey the government means that by definition the decisions of the government, of the officials, of the president, is the will of the people, because the will of the people is expressed by whom they obey. For whatever reason they obey. Fear, love, money, they obey. Now, they might obey well, they might obey effectively or not so effectively. Like we covered earlier, right? Stalin's Soviet Union was not a very effective way of controlling people because it was based on terror. And even Hitler's Germany was not the most effective mobilization base for the regime, because a big minority of the German people hated that son of a gun, that miserable, horrible creature, even though the majority loved him. But the United States, you know, is the best system in a way, because most of the people, without even thinking about it, habitually obey. They think that they should obey because they should, to be a good human being. You don't even think about it. Of course I should obey. And so whatever the president does represents the will of the people, because the people obey the government. Some governments don't have such great obedience, right? Weak states, dictatorships. And we can say that those governments still represent the people, but the people it's a very ineffective way of it goes back to mobilization. How do you effectively control people? The national morale or mobilization base. And what is the role of democracy in getting people to obey? Is that really what it's all about? That basically democracy is the best way to get people to obey, so that you can manipulate and utilize their resources if you are the authorities. It's a legitimation mechanism. You have to be. You voted for the president. Okay, your person lost, but he won. So if we go to war, you better not commit treason. Yeah, because we still struggle with all of these basic questions in political science. What is it? What are the role of elections? What does democracy mean? What is the significance of democracy? What does it mean in international relations? What does it mean in foreign policy? I mean, most people couldn't find, Vietnam on a map. Really, they couldn't if you asked them in the United States. But we say, well, the government represents the people because we're a democracy. And you should obey. Okay, let's go to heads is group 2. Heads, group 2. And so we asked Timon to speak. Where does your group fit?
I think so. Wait, could I see the statement? I don't know if it's disagree or agree. Oh, we were also between 3 and 4. Then I think we were talking, yeah, a little bit because we were talking about the fact that it is true that the people place all officials in offices, or most of them, the majority of them, but as for example the president or whatever, and that there is a possibility of impeaching, and that was like the Greece side that we talked about. But then when further talking, we said that at the end of the day, a lot of people, well, the president and a lot of like political figures go for their own will and their own advantage. So they will, a lot of them do that. So take their own advantages before the will of the people.
Well,
and during the reign of political figures, the will of the people can change, but that doesn't mean that that the officials will also change, because once elected, they continue normally with their views.
Well, I mean, okay, I mean, you can say that they do it for their own advantage, but their intention for why they're doing these things, we expect people that we elect to be president or prime minister or member of Congress or member of the Belgian parliament or the member of the European parliament, that those individuals will use their brains. We expect them to use their judgment capability, right? Otherwise, why do we need people there? We can just have everybody vote with a computer on any topic, and the majority voters in favor of one position win. We expect those people to use their brains. Now, they have their own needs and their own interests, and we assume they're ambitious and they have their desires for their own benefit, and some of them are motivated by a desire to do good for their country and for the world and for other people. But we expect them to use their brains. So why does that mean that they are not necessarily representing the will of the people? They still have to they always have to make judgments, and not just in foreign policy, in any policy area. And I don't have an immediate answer for that. But that's why I keep coming back to this notion. Basically, it's an issue of legitimation. And there is a tradition in political theory about this called Gramscian hegemony, which, this is outside the topic of this class. But basically, how do you convince people that they should obey, that they should believe that the people that rule over them have the right to tell them what to do? And they have the right, and they have an obligation to obey. And that means make sacrifices, pay your taxes, send your son or daughter to go fight in a war if necessary. That's not to judge them as being stupid. It's just the way human beings are. People form in groups, and people emerge in that group to dominate and have a lot of influence and control over the group. That's human civilization, right? You will form organizations. If you have an organization, somebody has authority over other people. That's what organizations do. And organizations give us Android telephones, they give us universities, they give us economies, they give us civilization. So I'm not judging this as people being silly because they obey. I'm not saying that. But we can understand this representing the will of the nation as a way by which to convince people that, I'm the president and I represent you, and I therefore have the right to tell us to make our policies towards other peoples, other nations. Okay. Heads is 3, and it's heads. So Kim Jae-hwan. Where does your group fit on this scale, Kim Jae-hwan?
Yeah, our group was chose number 3 because democracy can satisfy every people in America. So we thought that it's up to who the president is, and the personality of president is important for to satisfy the will of the people. And
Okay.
for example, like the immigration policy from the Trump administration was almost about his will rather than accommodating the people of America, because we thought that Trump would have chose the America First policy as public citizen in America.
A lot of Americans love Trump, and I mean, how do you convince people that the government represents the will of the people? You have elections. The Americans failed to persuade the Afghanistan people that the Afghan government that the Americans put in power and kept in power and supported for 20 years represented the will of the Afghan people. It just collapsed. As soon as the Americans took their guns away, it just fell up, it disappeared. And the Taliban won. Now, the Taliban aren't the nicest group of people, but there's no doubt in the mind of the typical Afghan person living in Afghanistan that the Taliban are Afghanistan. They are Afghanis. They are not traitors. They are not Chinilpa. You know, Koreans know what a Chinilpa is. It's a Korean who wants to be Japanese. And that was the failure. Even though the Americans had attempted to have elections in Afghanistan, the fact that those elections happened on the basis of American invasion made the point that anybody who came into power was seen as an American Chinilpa, not as an Afghanistan person, not as representing Afghanis. They didn't trust those people. So, yeah, okay, we're running out of time. Okay, and room 4, and that is.
Sir, we also still have to do the attendance.
Oh, okay, okay. Let me do attendance then. I forgot to do attendance. Screen share, and I don't have a. Okay, so I have to open up the smart attendance. Where is it? Okay, so who's speaking for room 4?
I'll do it.
Okay, go.
Well, the starting from the statement, the foreign policy represents the will of the people. But if we're thinking about, if I think about the United States right now, I think of a country that is being drawn towards two sides. It's either to Democrats or the Republicans. It's divided into two parts. So if it's representing the will of the people, I think we'll have to look at which president has made it into office. And last time it was with Trump, but it was a very anti-globalization, anti the rest of the world, go America first. And now it's Joe Biden trying to get back into the world, being more international. So I'm stuck between 3 and 4, between disagreeing and being neutral. So somewhere in between there.
Okay.
So
By the way, your attendance number is 100. 100. So I wrote, since I was assigned, you mentioned disagree as well. I had to write disagree, and I writing disagree because I flipped a coin. This is not necessarily my actual belief. U.S. foreign policy does not represent the will of the people because the people do not have an expressed will on U.S. foreign policy. The groups and factions and constituencies within the U.S. public respond and react to the foreign policy actions of the president. They react to what the president does. In other words, there is no such thing as the will of the people. The president acts and he gets a response, a reaction from the American public. And he takes that obviously reaction, he takes that obviously into consideration because he wants to maintain his power and authority in America, whether typically including for the next elections. So even in that case, it comes down to the will of the people is manifested in the support for who controls the government. And even if the president does really horrible things, if the people support him as being in control of the government, then he represents the will of the people. Ta-da! Aha! Because okay, I kind of reconcile that need for legitimation and control and authority and leadership. I mean, there are always leaders in an organization. Somebody who has much more influence and control over the followers than the followers do. Does the leader represent the will of the organization? We always say yes. The president of Exxon represents the will of Exxon. The president of the Catholic University of Korea represents the will of the Catholic University of Korea, right? Why wouldn't we say that about Belgium and US and South Korea? They're just big, vast organizations. That's all they are, about which we feel more or less emotional. Okay, so let's vote on this. Oh, I wanted to show you why this came up, right? So here's a news report that came up a couple days ago. It says that the General Mark A. Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, contacted the Chinese government twice to calm them down out of fear that Trump might attack them with nuclear weapons. President Trump might attack them with nuclear weapons. During a testimony before the US Congress, General Milley was speaking, it says here, as he was talked to, so Milley was interviewed by journalists. So you're going to have, there's a whole chapter on media. And the journalists were Robert Costa of Washington Post and Bob Woodward of Washington Post. And they're famous people. Bob Woodward was involved in the Watergate investigation. As he was talked to a succession of authors about his efforts during the last tumultuous months of the Trump administration to protect the military and American democratic institutions, talking about Milley, from a president who was searching for avenues to remain in power. So Trump wanted to stay in power, even though he lost the election. Those moves by Trump, as described in one book, culminated with General Milley twice calling to reassure his Chinese counterpart and extracting promises from the military chain of command in the United States not to launch a nuclear weapon on Mr. Trump's orders without first alerting him, Milley. That's what was going on back in December, January. So was Milley undermining democracy in the United States? Today's polarization means that anything that smacks of either a critique or an endorsement of Mr. Trump is suspect. So now, a little over a year after Mr. Trump's critics were furious with General Milley for walking across Lafayette Square during racial injustice protests, we won't talk about that now. Mr. Trump's supporters are angry at the general for telling House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, House Speaker of the House of Representatives in the Congress, in the days after the January 6th Capitol riots, that he agreed with her when she called Mr. Trump crazy. The dichotomy highlights an existential question that no senior official has confronted publicly. What is the military's duty in curbing the unilateral power of a reckless commander-in-chief? Because the president is commander-in-chief, according to the Constitution. At the end of the day, we want to adhere to normal rules and processes because that's important to sustaining a democracy, said Reza Brooks, a professor of political science at Marquette University and an adjunct scholar at West Point's Modern War Institute. That's where the military academy. Marquette is, I think, in Madison, Wisconsin, or Chicago, I don't know. But she added, look, the Constitution, American Constitution, is not a suicide pact. If you have someone in power who's dead set on taking that down, then you're responsible for calling that out. The Milley situation encapsulates that. So did Milley violate democracy by doing what he did? By going outside the chain of command and calling the Chinese generals and twice calming them down and So we're running out of time here. So let's go to the vote on this exercise. So to hold, is that the right one? You see here. Oh, yes. U.S. foreign policy is the will of the people. So please vote. And let me make sure you can see that. You have 30 seconds. Two more voters. Your neutral cannot decide. Oh no! Oh no! But I thought it's true. Democracy means the government acts on the will of the people. Okay, so that's it for that. So let's go to our debate topic and go back to screen share and go back to the topic here. And only one of you, two of you chose to be pro on the debate topic. And the debate topic is: to South Koreans, U.S. Constitution separation of powers undermines democratic control over U.S. foreign policy. And so, the only way to stop the president ultimately, if he's crazy, is to remove him from power through impeachment and finding him guilty. Trump was impeached twice, but not found guilty. And this isn't the first foreign policy crisis that he was involved with. Obviously, the other one was back with Joe Biden in Ukraine. And that's because it's unlike the British system, where the prime minister can be removed if the majority of the members of the leaders of the party don't like him anymore. So does the U.S. separation of powers, the Constitution separation of powers, undermine democratic control over U.S. foreign policy? And so that's the question. And so let's go to breakout rooms, and let me recreate and assign you to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 3, so 4, and assign manually. And so 1 will be pro, and yes, and we will assign to pro Alisa and Kyung, this one, Chun Hyo Kyung. And the other ones will be Con 1, Con 2, and Con 3. And we just assign 1, 2, 3, and assign 1, 2, 3, and assign 1, 2. Okay, so join your rooms, please. And who will speak first? Heads, it's the top person in the group. And it's tails. It's tails. And that means it's the bottom person. So Chon Hyo Kyung will speak first for pro. Gilles will speak first for Con 1. Timon will speak first for Con 2. And Kim Jae Won will speak first for Con 3. And I will write a statement as well. And heads, I am pro. And it's tails, so I'm con. And you are your paragraph, so you're ready to go. Okay. Okay, Chung Hyo Kyung for pro. Please make your pro statement. Chung Hyo Kyung.
Oh, yes. Okay. Our opinion on this topic is pro, and in the textbook, it said. Oh, let me read this. Judiciary has consistently dismissed issues relative to U.S. policy as political questions, and I admit these political questions as that judiciary regards political issues as if those are not their businesses, and this this means that the separation of power in the judiciary does not function very well in U.S. foreign policy, and the fact that the judiciary, which which is restricting the executive branch, supports the administration, is a questioning matter in democratic power.
Okay, I should mention, by the way, that the book is already kind of out of date because of the Trump era and also globalization, making domestic and international policy more and more integrated. The judiciary is becoming more active in shaping American immigration policy, and that reflects again globalization and what Hook later in the book calls intermestic policy, international and domestic policy becoming more and more always integrated. All right, so Khan, we have, let's see who speak next. And it is group Khan 1, if it's heads. Yes, Gilles, speak please. You are Khan.
Khan, would it be possible to transfer my speaking to someone else from my group?
Okay, let's see who's going to flip a coin then. And so who's going to speak for that group? Anais is pro, and it is Anais. Sorry, heads. Anais, go.
Yes. So we said that because the president is an important public figure, the Congress might find it difficult to show opposition to the president, and has been shown with the fact that only a few of the treaties have been rejected by the Congress. And also executive agreements are becoming more and more common. So the president has more power.
Okay. And so it is the Constitution separation of powers does not undermine the democratic control over U.S. foreign policy, because the presidency is becoming more and more strong, and the presidency represents the will of the nation. That's what presidents say. And I guess it depends upon, like we were talking about earlier, how many people believe him when he says that. And so we go back to Timen speaking for Khan too.
Yes, yes. So, well, we were calm, as said before. Well, and in our group, well, and what I wrote down, I was especially talking about Trump because, well, in my, I don't know if it's opinion or if it's fact, but Trump is a very impulsive person, and he has, well, and I think he has a little bit of an ego, and so. I in my piece, I talked about the fact that during his reign, because of his impulsiveness, it was a good thing to have a separation of power. This means that he couldn't do everything on a very impulsive high, and that everything needed to pass accordingly during the right steps, and that if there wasn't a separation of power, there maybe would have been a big war against Korea or China or another country.
Okay. Interesting. I hadn't thought about it like from that perspective. Well done. All right. And Kim Jae-hwan for Con 3. Kim Jae-hwan, your Con.
Yeah, our group was calm, and we both spoke about the textbook that says co-determination of foreign and domestic policy by the legislative and executive branches of the U.S. federal governments, that a principle that the founders of the U.S. Constitution incorporated to block tyranny at home and adventurism abroad.
Yeah, so
This
you know,
means that,
okay, go ahead.
that the executive led by the president cannot determine the foreign and domestic policies on their own. And
Okay. Go ahead.
I set the example as the war determination because the president, as the topmost military commander, can have sole authority to declare a war against any country without the approval of the Congress.
Okay.
And
okay. Go ahead.
And if he has the sole authority to command the war, there would be a huge responsibility.
Okay. And I wrote, Khan, the U.S. separation of powers does not undermine democratic control over foreign policy because it is critical. The separation of powers is critical for making Americans believe that the U.S. government represents them and they should obey it. It is part of American beliefs about what is right and proper in politics and government. Okay, so we have to close our class. So before we close, let's do the vote on the debate topic. And let me make sure I share the screen and share screen, go here, go to vote. And so please vote. You have 30 seconds. Fifteen seconds. Okay, well, that's it for today then. And I will see you next week. Bye.